Seeing none, I will close public comment and we will open our first work session, the Stormwater Funding Feasibility Study. City Engineer, welcome.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of council. We have Aaron and Elizabeth here from WSP again to present an update on our stormwater funding feasibility. We also have quite a bit of staff here to kind of assist as needed, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to WSP.
Thank you, and welcome. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. We have a lot of information to share with you tonight to remind us where we've been, things that we've done, and certainly want to get some very critical and important feedback from you. So let's see if I can run technology here. Great. So our agenda basically is for those who may be watching or listening on other sources to remind everyone what we've done, our background, where we've been, the study itself, what basic recommendations have come forward. And then we have new information that we want to review, the data that is supportive of how to move forward with establishing a fee-for-service, and two critical issues around the rates themselves. So we're going to ask for your very specific feedback to help us understand your preferences in going forward in the rate structure itself, and then how we manage across the future in building the capital program. The variability of capital projects is always an interesting challenge when we're working on establishing a user fee rate structure. And so we're going to talk with you tonight about two different approaches that we want you to consider in how we manage going forward to build the capital that's needed. So I want to remind everyone where we've been. This is a flow chart that we use in our industry that helps keep us on track. It's not intended for anyone to have to sit and read all of this. I merely want to emphasize to you that everything that's in the red box is what we've been working on over the last couple of phases of this work. Should it be the decision of council to go forward, the things that are below that big red box are things that would then lead forward to doing the implementation. So building the master account file, establishing the billing structure, all of those things, including an important outreach and education of the public, would occur based on your decision to whether this goes forward for implementation. So I just wanted to remind everyone, there's been a lot of work done, and we're pleased to bring a lot of the important results to you tonight. So when we started in the first phase of work. And what we learned in the first phase of work is basically summarized on this slide. The most important statement on this slide is in the lower right corner. The question that we came to understand was not whether new revenue is needed, but really how to distribute the cost of that new revenue across property owners in the city. So we recognize that there's a need to invest in your capital improvement program, your implementation of your master plan, being able to address and sustain existing infrastructure through effective maintenance and operation, and to be able to provide them a series of menus of levels of service. And we're going to just briefly go through, again, and remind everyone what's included in this program that we've been working through and have been engaging in. So the basic overview recommendations, priority number one, obviously, that master plan. You have approximately $130 million programmed in the master plan. That's a very significant capital investment. You're not going to eat the elephant all at once. And so again, one of our critical topics tonight is how to address the variability of those projects because they change in value over time as you're working through those priorities. But we also want to make sure that we're proactively sustaining the ongoing operation of the drainage network to make sure that we're effectively sustaining the future performance of that system. So investing in maintenance, making sure that new system components are well maintained over time, and bringing into the discussion the opportunity to address water quality at the time in which we're also addressing the quantity of water. You are not yet regulated by the state of Wyoming through the federal program that is in place through the Clean Water Act. And so all of the work that we really have built in the program leads to protecting you, ensuring, focusing on, adding some new components around water quality that will keep you, I think, ahead of the game in addressing those issues as well. So we created a group of citizens in order to help understand the values within the community, what is important to them, as we were working with staff to build the program of services that you will see that we cost out ultimately in the plan as we present it to you tonight. They really gave us great guidance on their expectations. You know, they want health, safety, property protected. They want to see flooding reduced. They want to understand in the industry from a developer engineer perspective what is expected of them. It's not a desire to avoid, it's a desire to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the city of Laramie. So it was really important to hear their input as we discussed with them then the values the community has and brings to the table. They were also a group that emphasized the importance of water quality and starting the process of investigating and really understanding then what is it that's happening within the stormwater realm that can lead to and has had an impact on water quality within the natural system here in Laramie, and really helped us be very clear about the idea that the public needs to understand these things and that education is critically important. We moved on in their conversation to talk about the level of service. The level of service we define in terms of frequency, in the focus areas of what we deliver, having sufficient resources on hand in order to protect the system and provide for the future. And so they gave us great guidance on that issue as well, and they worked through all of the details that Aaron's going to review with you in just a few minutes. We then built a financial model. We worked with staff on the principles that we should follow that would then track what the future expenditures would be based on meeting the expectations, both of the focus group, yourselves, and staff in managing this critical infrastructure. We also shared with them several months ago preliminary rates and tested very directly. In fact, I wouldn't let them leave the room until they answered the question, what's your reaction to these rates? And it was principally overwhelming. They were pleased to see where the preliminary rates were from a level, in particular what they might be paying, but also to understand that it was addressing a broad area of services at the rates that we were considering. And so we're going to talk about those again this evening. So I'm going to have Aaron come up and just walk you through very briefly. You've seen all of this information, but again, if someone in the audience is not aware, we want to make sure that they understand what the recommendations are going forward.
Thank you. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we set out to develop really a financial plan to address the stormwater issues, and we looked at what are the costs of current services. The city right now has operational expenses, engineering, maintenance, public works administration. The city is doing capital projects right now funded through the general fund, design, construction, project oversight. And we looked at what are the new service needs to meet the level of service desired, enhancing the street sweeping inspections, improving the capacity of the system, implementing additional projects, those that are identified in the master plan, the design, the permitting, the construction, along with continuing the city's program to line existing pipes to extend the lifespan, improve the flow quality. And then administration to handle financial accounting, the customer support on the billing side. And so this should look familiar. This is the overall picture of the menu choices that we arrived at working with staff, the Stormwater Focus Group, and yourselves across the 5 different categories of stormwater services. And yeah, as we discussed, asset management, system inspection, those O&M items was felt that we could start at a medium level to really get into that proactive management, inspecting the pipes, finding the problems before they happen. Whereas engineering and planning, which is tied into the capital improvements, needs a couple of years to ramp up. We don't have those projects ready to build in year 1, so we have to do some design. We have to get staff that can inspect those. So those would start at a basic, move into a medium. And then admin, customer service, kind of the same thing, start at a basic and then move into a medium level with the goal of getting to high levels in some categories in those out years, like year 10. So we won't go through all this in detail, but this is just reminding us that when we built this specific cost model, we wanted to say, what is the cost of getting to that level of service? So for example, in asset management, if we're going to increase the inspection so we can inspect the entire system over a rolling 5-year period, we need to hire 4 public works street operators. We need to buy new CCTV camera equipment in year 2. The people we hire need new tools, supplies. So that's built in detail in the model to meet those outcomes that we have listed. I think I went too far. So O&M is kind of similar to asset management, really trying to get to, in addition to that proactive approach, can we also increase the capacity to complete some minor repairs in-house, things that are at the, say a block level, less than $1 million, pipes that are 24 inches and smaller? Can the city do those themselves to kind of speed up the process of upgrading the system? And in engineering and planning, in order to manage these additional projects, we have an engineering technician added year 1, a full-time engineer in year 2. They're going to be overseeing these projects, inspecting these projects, in addition to handling the things they're already doing, which is handling the review and oversight of private development activities. And really, we're increasing an investment in the drainage system capacity to try to, reduce flooding. The capital projects investment goal was funding at a level of about $4 million a year. So that's what the cost model was based on average. And you'll see when we get to the summary, the projects don't come in even $4 million a year increments. So that really varies. And then administration and customer service, we need to track what the program is doing. We need to report on that to the public so they can see the benefits of what's going on. We need to have customer service for billing questions. And every year, update, see if the rates need updating, because things are going to change. We have put together a projection, but maybe the grant we plan to get doesn't come in. Maybe we get an additional grant and we don't need to spend money from the enterprise fund. Things will change, so every year we need to be able to do that analysis to update those rates to meet the cash demand that we have. So part of the administration and customer service area takes on that. So where we arrived at is this forecast for costs of stormwater management services. It's broken down into the personnel, the direct operating expenses, and capital projection over the next 10 years. And you can really see that, the personnel and direct operating costs are relatively steady. It's that capital projection, because in year one, we don't have projects ready to construct, so we're doing a lot of design. Year two, we're doing some design and some construction. We have a big project out in fiscal year 28, so we need to be ready for that. One of the important things to point out about this is we're going to ask you to look at some options on how you set up the rate structure, and then also how the rates change over time. But it's important to note that this level of service is constant. We're not asking you to choose a different level of service to go to a lower level of service. We're just changing how it's paid for and really how that capital reserve fund is managed. Do you build it up immediately, or do you wait till those projects are about to happen and then increase the rates later to meet that need at that time? Just wanted to note that this is the forecast that the model's based on, and it doesn't change based on the options we'll show you. So the big thing that happened since we last saw you is the city had contracted with a vendor to do a new high-resolution aerial flight of the city, and we've got data from that even earlier than expected, which was great. So we have high-resolution aerial imagery. They use that to create and delineate things that do not allow water to permeate the surface. So all the impervious areas like roofs, streets, sidewalks, patios, they delineated those, and it's great data. We don't always see this data. Elizabeth can attest to that. Like this is better than what we usually see. It accurately identifies the data by type, whether it's a building, a sidewalk, whether it's public sidewalk, private sidewalk. Same thing with roads, is it public or private? Typically, public infrastructure like the roads and sidewalks are excluded from billing, so we need to have that separated. Decks, patios. As you can see, as we look at this, the fine details of the, it picks up the shapes of the buildings, and it's really a quality product. Here is zooming into, say, a block level on the right, and then an individual property level on the left. And it's hard to read the labels, but you can see, a building, maybe a garage, concrete sidewalks. It picks up a lot of things that even you can't see when there's tree cover. They took the flight when there wasn't tree cover, and it picked it up. So really good data. Here's an example of a non-residential property. And you can see it's got the building. It does a really good job of excluding those landscaped areas, islands in the parking lot. And what this level of data provides is confidence that if people have questions, about a bill, you can pull this up and say, well, let's take a look and see if we got it right. And, you're going to be pretty close. Now, it's not perfect. There's, as we are all looking at it, everybody's like, well, let me look at my house. And you'll see, oh, they, didn't get this deck right over here that I added on. Or maybe part of the neighbor's shed looks like it's coming across my property line. And so there's some little corrections like that may need to occur. But all in all, it's really good data. So what we did with that data was take the county parcel boundaries, and that's what's shown in black on this map, and overlay those on top of the data, and that allows us then to calculate how much impervious area is on each parcel in the entire city. So for 10,000 parcels, we have calculated the impervious area, and you can only do that if you have good data to start from. And you can see, the impervious area delineations are really precise. The parcel boundaries, just by their nature, are somewhat approximate. They're close, but they're not quite there. And so there will be things like it may cut across somebody's shed that's really on another person's property. Those things we can correct. But we've got data for every parcel in town. And so when we get to the next slide, this should look a little familiar. Last time we showed you one of these, this is a distribution of residential, single-family residential properties. Last time we based it on about 200 or 300 that we had just hand measured. Now we have all 7,000 parcels. On the bottom is the impervious area in 500 square foot increments. And the top, and then the left side is the number of parcels in that 500 square foot bucket. You'll notice that it looks similar to the shape we saw before. It has a nice bell curve. It has a long tail at the end. One thing to point out is there in that 0 to 500, there's 376 properties. So those are vacant residential properties, most of them. There are some where there used to be a building and there's a house slab there, or in some cases there is a very small house. For our analysis on these going forward, we exclude that category. For a lot of these, there's nothing on there anyway, but typically there is a low limit when you set these up where you just don't bill below a certain amount, and right now that's set at 500 square feet, so you'll see we ignored those and look at the rest. We took your feedback from our last meeting. We talked about how to equitably distribute costs among residential property owners, and we initially showed a flat rate for every residential parcel. So we looked at two different options we'll show you tonight on how to distribute residential property billings. And so it doesn't apply to the non-residential. Those are determined the same way either way, so it's really the residential. The first is a tiered option. So we took that distribution and we grouped it into buckets. Tier 1 in this case goes from 500 to 1,500 square feet, and they would pay 0.5 equivalent residential units. And one thing I should have pointed out on this is the median of all these properties is 2,849 square feet. See, that falls in the middle of the tallest bar there. That's what we called an equivalent residential unit. But instead of charging everybody one equivalent residential unit, now they're in buckets. That tier 1 bucket would pay 0.5 equivalent residential units, and we'll show you what a rate for one of those units is later. But there are 468 parcels in that tier 1 bucket. Tier 2 goes from 1,500 to 3,000. Those owners would pay 0.8 equivalent residential units. There's about 3,800 parcels. That's the largest tier. Tier 3 goes from 3,000 to 4,500. They would pay 1.2 equivalent residential units. Tier 4 is anything over 4,500 square feet, and they would pay 1.8 equivalent residential units, and there's about 1,000 parcels in that category. So you can see that it starts to make things more equitable, in that if you're in tier 4, you're paying between 3 and 4 times the amount of people in tier 1, and you have at least between 3 and 4 times the amount of impervious area. But it does still create some inequity. If you look, within tier 4, if you're on the 10,000 square foot end of things, you're paying the same as the person who has 5,000 square feet. So there is some inequity between the tiers, but we're starting to get some more equity. So that's one of the options, is a tiered residential system. The non-residentials in this, they would just pay however many of those equivalent residential units they have. So if you had to make the math easy, I guess you had a commercial property with 28,000 square feet, that would be equivalent of 10 houses, so it would pay 10 equivalent residential units, if that makes sense.
Mr. Mayor?
Is that Councilor O'Doherty?
Yeah, so when you're saying, so it's going to, for commercial, it's going to be based on the impervious, right? Not just the square footage, because otherwise what would be the point, right? It's going to be based on the impervious land in a commercial space?
That is correct, yes. For a non-residential, any non-residential, whatever the exact impervious area measurement is, we would divide it by that equivalent residential unit number, that 2,849, and it would pay however many units that is. The residential is also based on the exact measurement of impervious area, but they get placed into buckets, so anyone within that range pays the same amount, whereas a non-residential, there are no tiers. They just pay if you have 100,000 square feet, you divide that by the 2849 and pay that many equivalent residential units. So it is tied to the exact number of square feet. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Doherty. All right, back to you, Aaron.
So the other option we'll show you is the fixed basis per square foot. So what if we charged all parcels, whether they're residential or non-residential, the same rate per square foot? Because we do have that data now for every parcel. So typically you don't want to bill down to a square foot. That, you know, creates a lot of issues. So you'd say, well, let's bill every 500 square feet as your billing unit, but it's really, you can take it as a rate per square foot. So in this example, let's say the measurement came out to 3,700 square feet. We divide that by the billing unit of 500 square feet, so that's 7.4 billing units, and that parcel would be billed 7 billing units. We'd round to the nearest whole billing unit. Typically use natural rounding, so 7.6, they'd pay 8. But it's based on the exact impervious area measurement. So if we were to look back at the distribution here, now if you're in that tier 4 and you're the 10,000 square foot of impervious area, you're paying twice as much as the 5,000 square foot impervious area because it's based on the exact measurement. So this graph here on top is really showing what's the distribution of impervious area by land use. And this is from the county parcel data. And it's ended up being, you know, roughly a third residential, a third commercial, and a third exempt. So we don't mean it's exempt from the stormwater fee, but just a tax exempt property in the county database. And then 2% industrial. So we usually talk in terms of residential and non-residential. So in those terms, it would be 1/3 residential and roughly 2/3 non-residential in the city of Laramie. When we compare these two options and look at how many billing units there are in each category, in the tiered option, you can see there's fewer billing units because the billing unit is larger, right? That's a 2,800 square foot billing unit versus the 500. So that's why you see 28,000 billing units under the tiered option, 169,000 under the fixed value. So when we look at the rates, obviously the rate per billing unit is going to be less under the 500 square foot option. But one thing to notice when we compare those is when we look at the bottom two pie charts, on the right-hand side, when we're doing that fixed value per square foot option, the billing unit distribution exactly matches the impervious area distribution. That makes sense, right? That's how we're calculating it. But on the left side in the tiered option, you can see a slight shift in the residential has a slightly smaller number of billing units. It shifts down 2%. That's because really those larger parcels were getting a break because they're paying the same number of billing units throughout that whole tier, whereas in the other option, they're not. So it just shifts about 2% down from the residential.
Councilor Shumway.
Aaron, I don't think you'll get into this. I'm just going to ask this question now. And it's specific to the University of Wyoming. Do they pay, I'm going to give you 3 examples, and you tell me how they would pay. Vacant property, Jacoby, and all of the recreation fields, and then the regular, where they have buildings, you know, parking lots, things like that. How would they pay using these 2 examples?
Right. So in both examples, vacant properties would pay 0 since they would have no impervious area. Sports fields tend to have some impervious area, you know, especially if it's a turf field versus natural grass. So they would have a bill based on the amount of impervious area in the sports field, likely not as much as in the next category where they have, say, the last category was buildings, their facilities. So in that case, because they're non-residential, there'd be no difference in their bill between these 2 options because non-residential is charged the same. So they would have a different number of billing units, but as you'll see, the rate is between the 2 is different. So hopefully that makes sense. They'd be charged on the exact amount of square feet of impervious area they have, under each. It's only the residential that get put into tiers where they might have a difference, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth now, and we'll talk about the financial policy. So I presented the first question that we wanted some input on those two rate structures, and she'll present the second.
Thank you. Welcome back, Elizabeth.
Okay, so now we get to roll up our sleeves and talk about some of the tough stuff of deciding going forward. So we introduced this information to you the last time that we talked. This is the financial policy that we worked with staff on and how we built the actual rate models that are predicting where the rates would start and throughout the 10-year period. So it's important to recognize there are external resources as well that the enterprise fund can take in. So the general fund is looking at an initial contribution. Sorry, the word just wasn't coming out of my mouth. Also, the use of bonds. Again, these are brought in strategically as the capital program has that broad variability that Aaron demonstrated. There's targeted fiscal years for grants, and as Aaron indicated, hopefully the grants come in, maybe there'll be more, they could be less. Managing that resource over time is interesting. And that we've worked with staff to establish a credit policy to recognize private investment that is contributing in a positive way. We'll be bringing that forward to you. We were working on it again today with staff. So the two-rate option has different consequences. And the growth of rates, if you remember the slide that showed the 10-year progression of costs, right? The approach that we have put together allows us to look at the way in which capital is funded over time. So we have two starting points. In one case, we are starting at a lower level rate. The immediate demand for cash is not as high, but the demand for establishing a capital reserve so that you can manage that reserve in a way that is predictable over time is the critical option. So we ran a model that starts with lower rates, and we ran a model that modifies the initial starting rates that helps build cash. Now, it's important, and we certainly recognize that the public can be very concerned about cash sitting around, and rightfully so. We want to make sure and meet the commitment that we made to the focus group that there would be demonstrated progress by raising these funds. But as you saw in the progression of the capital program, the sequencing, because there's a logical sequence to building these projects. It's not just driven by what money's available. It's driven by the relationship of those projects in concert with each other. So there's some things that have to be done first in order to move through another series of projects. And so it's making the capital go up and down. So we built these two models that allow us to manage the growth rate for the rates themselves in a moderate way, averaging about a 5% change over the 10-year period. And we let the rates basically go where they need to go based on this variability that was happening in the capital program. That's a policy decision that's in your hands. That's not our policy to make. That is an important starting point decision for you. And so that first option is, how do we want to grow rates over time? So the two bar charts you see there are for either the tiered approach or the fixed valued approach, letting the rates go where they need to go. And you can see that there's a lower starting point, there's a jump, and they have much more erratic growth because that's the way the capital program goes. So that's one important element in analyzing this. When we look at the rates then that are calculated for that approach, allowing the rates to go where they need to go, for the approach that is the tiered approach, that's the first line, we were starting at $75 a year per billing unit. Now, that $75 a year in the tiers is variable, but the $75 is the basic billing unit value in year one for the approach that has tiered residential. And we're going to show you how it all I apologize, there was no simple way to put all these on one slide. So there are 8 of them we're going to work through. So we can go back and forth, whatever you need in order for us to come back to the conversation. The second set of rates you see here are for using the 500 square foot value, and they're starting out at $10 per billing unit, per 500 square feet. So if you have 1,500 square feet, you're talking about 30, right? 3 times $10 a year. Okay? Bear with me and raise your hand when this gets awfully confusing. So here's the second option, where we start the rates a bit higher. It allows the capital reserve to build, but you'll see a much smoother change in rates over time in both rate structures, whether it's the tiered rate structure or whether it's the fixed valued rate structure. So we evened out that growth so that it's able to create resources in concert with both the grants and bond approach that would come into the program as well. But we smoothed it out so that there's not this erratic change. Rates don't have to go up and down. They don't have to climb dramatically. But they will start higher in the sense that they're creating cash, so that when we get to year 3 and 4, where some of the bigger projects are, there's cash in concert with other resources in order to build those projects. So that's important to get that feedback, and this is what the rates look like under that approach. So for the tiered value.
Can we hold for 1 second?
Oh, sure.
Councillor O'Doherty has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
City Clerk. Go ahead, Councillor.
If we could back up one to that graph. So if you are half of the people, because the median was the 3,700 square feet, whatever, that means half of the people would be paying less than this amount in that first graph here. And half would be paying more. I mean, like half would be paying less than that, right?
Yes, in fact, if you'll be patient with us a bit, you're going to see a slide that actually calculates out then the starting rates for all 4 tiers if the residential approach in tiering is chosen. So we have some slides that will demonstrate what those actual values are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
Back to you.
Okay, so this is now the projected rates, allowing for some initial cash development to smooth out those capital projects. So the approach using tiers in the residential starts at 120, not 75. The impervious area 500 square foot billing unit starts at $10 or $20, not $10. Over time, the same resources are generated. It's a matter of handling cash flow to smooth out the variability of those capital projects. That is the significant difference between these two. So we want you to think about that, because here's the actual calculation so you have a sense of what is within the tiered charges. This is using the initial rate where it's lower. We start at $3.12 a month for that lower group tier of residential properties. The higher group tier is at $11.25 a month.
Please, Counselor Shumway.
Doing some just quick math. If we do 75 for 17,000 residential units, it comes out to less than $2 million a year. If we do 120, it comes right at $2 million a year. Now, you said we're going to have projects $4 million a year and it would take, I think, 32 years to hit $130 million to complete the project. How are we ever going to catch up if we don't bring in enough to cover the four? Is it going to be general fund $2 million and then ratepayers $2 million? Is that how this is going to be?
No,
the cash flow.
Yeah, the cash flow takes in the contribution from the general fund as in that initial first year, and it has several years where we're infusing bond money, and there's 2 years where we're pursuing significant grants. Okay? So if you will tolerate me flipping through these slides, let's go back and look at that. That capital projection shows you how major projects are moving through this first 10 years. The next 10 years would have the same sort of variability. And so you see in FY26, we're going from 600,000 to 3 million. That's a significant infusion of cash. And so having the investment of the general fund right up front helps us manage that second year at 3 million. And then you'll see capital goes down again. But then in FY28, we're up at $9.5 million in capital projects. And so the rate models are built to address all of these needs in this order. And of course, we know this is a forecast. Things are going to change. But this gives us the idea of how to manage the progression of these projects from design through construction with a cash flow that can meet the needs, whether it's with the initial balance of the general fund that is making a contribution, in concert with additional contributions from the fees, in concert with some bonds being issued, as well as grants being pursued. So not all the revenue is coming from the fees. There is, I believe we added up today, about 14 million that's coming through other resources over time. Okay? The fees are balancing out that flow.
Counselor Newman, Gabriel, Pierce. We're lining up.
This might be for city staff. I don't really know. So will this enterprise fund pay back the general fund? If so, when? And if not, why?
That's, I'll turn this over to
Director Wade.
someone who can answer this.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Councilors. So, oftentimes when you start up an enterprise fund, or say you start financial planning for an enterprise fund, because some can linger for a long time without those plans, you do contribute governmental resources. Those can come from the general fund. They can also come from, like, say, the specific purpose tax. And some of you on the council will remember that we have used specific purpose tax proceeds, especially in water and wastewater, when we were kind of rebuilding those utilities. And so we also heard from the council that they wanted to direct some of the resources that the general fund had been contributing over time, and maybe some of the resources that the general fund had in hand from some of the additional sales and use tax collections that we've had, to mitigate the impact to the ratepayer. And so it is not at this time our plan to have the $5 million infusion be a loan to the enterprise fund. It would be startup funds. That's the way I'm thinking of it, an investment. But it is a one-time investment based on the current financial model. You should also know that the city will pay for its use, if you adopt this rate, of the stormwater services. And so in that way, the general fund would pay for these services, just like we do with water and wastewater. Did that answer your question?
Thank you, Counselor Newman. Counselor Gabriel?
I had a question about all of these numbers and the idea of inflation based on maybe 3 or 4% per year. Is
That's built into the
built-
projection. Absolutely.
that rate?
It's variable. We have a rate for salaries and a rate for fixed costs, supplies, materials, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Counselor Pierce?
Yeah, so apparently I've had a misunderstanding.
City Clerk, did you have something to add?
Sorry, Mayor. I was trying to be subtle to let you know Micah has her hand
Oh,
raised.
thank you. I'm sorry, I ruined your subtlety entirely. Okay, Counselor Pearson, and then Counselor Richardson, you'll be up next. Sorry, City Clerk.
So this is for city staff, a little bit of this is anyway. I was under the impression that technically this was not an enterprise fund, but we are treating it like an enterprise fund, like we do with mosquito and garbage, correct? Am I wrong? Did I miss it last time?
Director Wade?
Because I
I
didn't
have the
think,
same recollection.
okay.
Honorable Mayor, through you, to answer this question. So we actually heard, what we thought we heard from the council as staff was that you did want to dedicate some general fund resources to this fund. As you know, at the City of Laramie, we have a long-standing practice that our enterprise funds become fully self-supporting. So what we heard from that is you'd really prefer this be like a special revenue fund treatment, where it's mostly self-supporting, but it's going to get some resources from the general fund. However, when we dug a little deeper into the state statute defines our ability to set this rate for an enterprise fund, and an enterprise fund can receive resources from governmental funds. So we're proposing you the model that we discussed with you last work session in a slightly different form to make sure we're in compliance with state statute. So nothing has really changed, but I do appreciate that you picked up on that because it is a slight departure from how we talked about it the first time, but nothing different in terms of the funding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that answers that. So then my next question or comment which is kind of what I think Councilor Shumway was getting at was, $3 a month and we've got $120 or $130 million behind, right? With some really priority projects in that $30-ish million range, and we're only getting to we're not even getting there, or are we getting there if we add that all up? He's just, I think he's wondering how long and how many years are we going to be at this $3 potential collection when we're 120 million-ish in the hole, basically.
And that's certainly a key question that we had with staff as well as the focus group on our ability to eat that big elephant, right?
Right.
One of the things that we certainly recognize is that you can't go 100 miles an hour the first year of effort, right? And so what we did with staff was to build a strategy over this first decade that enables them to create internal resources. There is a demand when you're going to be putting through projects of this magnitude that you have the staff on hand that can manage them. Regardless of the fact that you put them out to bid and construction, you still need to have the internal competency to manage that much throughput in contracting. So we worked with him on a schedule like that, and that's where you heard Aaron talk about an average $4 million in capital a year. Of course, that's not the way we've programmed it, but we took that initial group of priority projects and built them out using that $4 million forecast in our initial work. Once we had a strategy in place from a resource forecast, we started putting those projects out in schedule that were more logical to what needed to be constructed and the frequency and what would follow behind it from the priority list. So this is only your first 10 years. You can speak, and this can be increased in your ability to buy that by two things. Again, you have internal resources that can handle increasing that construction, and you have future councils committed to providing those resources, no matter where they come from. You have some very large grants that you want to pursue. That may well be a big piece of this. We did not include those. The assumption was those really big projects would come through grant funding. And so we know that there's a mix of other resources that will come into this. What we're trying to show you is what we felt comfortable predicting and the staff's ability to manage this level of workflow.
Okay, so if I could keep, so I understand what you said. I guess from my perspective, relief on other, I would like to see, and I think it's there, relief on that capital budget, because we know we're also behind in roads, right, and other things. So if moving from $3.16 to $4.16 gives us a little more relief in roads or other capital projects, I guess I'd like to see that, because I know we're behind in not just stormwater drainage projects. We are behind in other areas as well. And personally, I'd like to see a little relief in that capital project budget for other things, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Counselor. Does anyone else have any?
Mike, I think.
Oh, Micah, thank you. You guys on the wings are keeping me on the rails. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Counselor.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. And I might be kind of getting in the weeds here, and so maybe this isn't necessarily the time for this part of the discussion, but the point about staff came up, and it just makes me think about, we have that budgeted into these, ongoing years, but we struggled to find the staff, it seems like, over the years. Have we thought about what that looks like and what happens if we can't find the staff and how that impacts this, and have we budgeted, and I'm sure we have, but I just want to double check, have we budgeted those salaries at a rate that will ensure that we get those folks on staff here?
Yes, following guidance is an excellent question. Following guidance from staff, we set those rates in what was considered a competitive range, but also recognize that there is a trade-off, and the trade-off is the capacity of the engineering community to assist as well. So folks like Aaron and myself, working for a for-profit company, at times can be more competitive with what we offered to the same staff that you need. And so there is that option that's available to you, which is outsourcing some of the oversight. I believe in that. As a former public works director, I certainly did that, where I would use a consultant to actually manage other consultants. It's not a comfortable place to be, even as a former public works director, because there's a cost of doing that, and that's the profit that comes into the mix for for-profit companies. However, if the need to build is there and the ability to recruit is not creating the outcomes you want, yes, we're partners with our local governments, and yes, you can put yourself in the position of using sources such as our company, and no, I'm not lobbying, I'm using it as an example, that could step in and play that role. We place employees in our local governments as requested. And from the public's perspective, it's not a matter of who's cutting the paycheck. It's a matter of the work that's getting done. So there are options to push production in the capital side. It's a matter of offering you a picture for the first 10 years that is manageable, that is based on resources that we were both staff and ourselves comfortable projecting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Richardson. Any other general questions, councilors? I'm going to ask you to maybe be a little more specific. I would like to get to, Elizabeth, you mentioned how do we want to grow over time? So that question of maybe the shape of the growth path and sort of the mercurial nature of one option. Councilors, do you have a sense of the direction you would like to go here?
Is she done? I don't think she's.
10 years at a time.
Well, the question would be about the growth between sort of the year over year. Do we want to go the route where it has sort of the swings, where in 4 years we've doubled the rates?
And that's this slide compared to this
so
slide.
I'm asking if you all, tend to like, I guess I'll just be, maybe I'll lead off. I tend to like this more steady growth. I think it feels a bit like a bait and switch to start and say like, well, we gave you really low rates when we all know in 4 years they're going to be double that. To me, that feels a little disingenuous. I don't mean to paint anybody else's comments as disingenuous, but I just, that's the direction that I feel like is wise, but I would love feedback if anybody else feels the opposite. And I see Councilor Richardson, you've got your hand up, so you go ahead.
I feel similarly in the option 2, and I tend to lean toward the fixed value. I think people will feel like that's more fair, it's more specific, it's more, if they end up on the low end of that tier 4, or perhaps adding an additional tier. I don't know what the reality of that looks like. But this feels, I think when people look and would talk to me about this, it would be like, well, this is real specific. It's very fair. I can see exactly where my money is going. And so that one, option 2, fixed value, feels best to me.
Thank you, Councilor Richardson. And yeah, I was going to touch on the fixed versus tiered as well. So if you have opinions there too, please add those in, Vice Mayor. And then we'll head to you, Councilor O'Doherty, after the Vice Mayor.
I think during the discussion, I have consistently leaned toward the fixed approach. I think it's more equitable. I think we might get some secondary benefits from it where possibly it would encourage smaller development with less impervious space, which is something that we're kind of working on when it comes to housing. So I think that this fixed rate where you directly pay for the impervious amount may have more benefits other than equity among space. So.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor Doherty?
I agree with the last two comments. I would also say by having it the fixed value, somebody that is just on the edge into a new tier or into, we might encourage people to pull up some of that concrete that is just, or get rid of that shed that wasn't doing anything to reduce impervious spaces. So if somebody might want to do something to bring down their rate, and they're more likely to have that option with the fixed value. Maybe I'm just living in a dream, but it seems to me, also I just think it's a lot fairer, because that fourth tier was so big that I'm really uncomfortable with those extremes paying the same rate. So I'm with you on option 2 and fixed value.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Newman, please.
Option 2 as well. I can't pick whether I want the tier fixed, so I'm not going to help you on that. I do have a question, though, that would probably help me decide. So if people rainscape and keep all, they have sidewalks and stuff that go into a retaining pond on their own property, would that make my rate cheaper?
No.
That doesn't help me either. So.
Good try, though.
Yeah.
Is that something, just out of curiosity, is that something we could consider if you are working to restrict stormwater drainage, then you are aiding the entire system, right? Like if you are retaining water on your own property, you have effectively sort of added what we would call net metering in a sort of solar installation world. You are doing that for our stormwater system. It maybe is not, I guess the question is that significant enough to warrant us building a program around it?
I can speak only from experience in working with a host of communities across the United States and Canada. What you're targeting then are your much smaller properties, and the net value return to the system is quite small. With an offsetting administrative oversight to manage in your billing system and verify that something is being done, and it has an overhead burden that goes along with it. However, that said, encouraging people to behave that way through your education and outreach program is absolutely valid, because the end game is sustaining performance of the drainage system, making sure that what is currently in place or what comes in the future is managed in a way that can handle all of the properties effectively. So the end game is, let's get flooding stopped. Now, obviously, Mother Nature is not going to accomplish that for you, because you're going to have rain events that are catastrophic. We can't avoid those things from happening. But sustaining the ongoing performance of the drainage system, everyone contributing, is a positive force. So what does it do in the long term? Perhaps you don't have to increase your maintenance strategy as quickly from a medium level to a high level, because everyone's gotten on board and is helping with the end game. So over time, there can be a positive impact to everyone. Rates don't grow as quickly as they're, in this particular case, projected. So there is value. It's how you go about accomplishing that value.
Yeah, thank you. And as you were speaking, I was thinking as well about maybe the equity involved with some folks, not in a residential situation, well, maybe in a larger development sense, but specifically in commercial, they've already put in a bunch of this storm, we've required them to include that, and those folks would not see necessarily that benefit of, say, like a company who retrofitted their property into having a pond or something. It may create a bit of an inequity, but you had a follow-up, Councilor Newman? And then to you, Councilor Shumway.
I would still like to see something incorporated in there because I had, and this is what brought the question, I had a coworker who's building a house and he was questioning me on some of the stuff and he was like, well, if I put rainscaping in, would that be cheaper? And I was like, A, we don't have a program, but B, no. And he's like, all right, then I'm not going to do it. And I think that's what we would see even with the smaller houses would be like, all right, well, if I'm not, why should I incorporate some money into this if I'm not going to get a kickback, whether it's a lower rate or whatever? And I think the overhead, just my opinion, would be less if I brought you, like, hey, here's the stuff I did, here's the pictures. Like, I don't think staff would have a whole much more salary into it to change me to a different fixed value. By the way, I do like the fixed value, making my mind up, because it is something that I said the first work session too. So anyways, I would like to see something incorporated that if we do something, because I don't know how big my house is, but we retain a good portion of the water because I fill up 2 pools for my dogs, and that is stopping flooding in West Laramie. So I'm not asking for a kickback, but it would help, right, to less wear and tear over, especially in West Laramie, keeping some of the rock and stuff out of those drains over there. So.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think I would very much oppose giving any credits for retaining water. And the reason is this. It's not the little guy, it's the big guy. So if the big guy comes and says, look, we've got this huge golf course, we've got all these parks, we've got all this vacant land. And so really what happens is our offset is for the entire campus. And I don't want to go down that road. I want to make sure that, there's contribution from everyone within the community that has anything to do with our expense for the investment in the inventory that we're going to provide for the entire community.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Pierce.
So help me out with defining and give me examples of the tiered and fixed rate, because I must have quit listening when we talked about the fixed rate. I mean, I kind of got the tiered rate, and that is the square footage of the impervious areas.
It's a range.
Right? So fixed, tell me what fixed is.
Okay, let me see if I can flip back. Aaron, you remember which slide it is that, there? Yeah, right there. Okay. So this is showing a residential calculation under a fixed 500 square foot billing unit. So we don't think of it in terms of relationship to other residential properties. We think of it as a billing unit. The unit is 500 square feet. In this case, we have a home with 3,700 square feet of imperviousness. We do the math, and it tells us with 500 square feet as the billing unit, that we have 7.4 billing units. If the rate is 83 cents a month per billing unit, it would be 83 times 7.
I may have an easier way to explain it. It's just they're in buckets, Jane. I think that picture where you show the tiers.
This is the tiers, Councilor Pierce, so this would be lumping them into,
Right.
like, they all are paying this rate.
These are buckets. That's the bucket slide?
Okay,
Yeah.
And this would be the tiered conversation. Would be
Right.
Putting them into boxes rather than you're paying for your individual unit.
so if a person what's the difference in the actual rate? Or is there any? I mean, because if
The math creates different values. The revenue is the revenue. We meet the program demand regardless. It's who's paying and how are you distributing it. When you use a tiered approach, you have improved the concept of equity from the original conversation with you that all residential pay one billing unit. By creating now differences between them, in this case, we created 4 buckets of impervious area, okay? But if you're in bucket 2, you are not as equitably charged if you're on the low end of bucket 2 as those on the high end of bucket 2. Even though you're only talking about 1,500 square feet.
I get that, and the fixed rate would be?
In the fixed rate, it's house by house, exactly what we measure on your property, and the fixed rate is the most equitable approach because it's not about the property's use.
Okay.
It's about what's on the property. And so you eliminate all that differentiation, comparing one to another, what's fair, what's not. It's impervious divided by 500 square feet.
And we've got the data to do fixed?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
You have great data, I will tell you that. I've worked on lots of these. I was thrilled when I saw the quality of the data. You guys have a terrific vendor providing that information to you. It is excellent.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. Any other council members want to weigh in on this part? Oh, Councilor Newman had okay. Vice Mayor, please.
I just want to thank Councilor Pierce for bringing that up because I think that there may be people in the public who, it is very confusing. So I appreciate you bringing that up so that it could be clarified. Thank you also.
Would we have an administrative process for folks who think they were slighted by this, who think they were billed an extra unit or something?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And is that built into, because that's obviously an extra staff cost.
It is built
built in?
into the process as customer service is for any of your other charges. There is a process, and it would be written into the ordinance how someone could appeal, what is the basis of appeal, who to appeal to, those kinds of things. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Councilors, other questions? Do you feel like you have what you need out of this?
Absolutely. I can tell you that, and I'm not going to bore you with the last few slides because it's not necessary.
I may have jumped ahead in your presentation.
Oh, no, you didn't.
We started
No,
down the path, I thought.
No,
Better see if we're
absolutely.
getting off the rails here. And if we should
No,
circle
I
back.
certainly appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. It's made it very easy to zero in on those 2 questions. Which rate structure,
You bet.
which approach to managing cash flow.
Great. And Councilor Richardson, do you have something to add here? I see your hand is up.
One follow-up question based on Councilor Newman's question about the giving some credit to folks who do like ponds or drainage of that sort. And I appreciated Joe's comment, Councilor Shumway's comment about not, we want to be there for the little guys. Have you guys ever looked at that as an option just for residential, or are we then getting back into this space where, well, that's not fair because now we have businesses getting something that, or residential getting something that businesses don't? I'm just curious about that.
We have been discussing, as I shared when we first started, the credit policy, and we'll be bringing that discussion to you. And so we're wrestling through all of these issues and options right now. So your feedback is most appreciated on that one as well.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Doherty?
I have a couple of questions that might be for staff. So I don't know if you want to wait till later or what.
Oh, this seems like as good a time as any.
Okay, I'll throw it out there. I guess I don't need answers now, but I'm wondering how gravel yards, rock yards are treated. Are they treated like permeable or impermeable? They seem to be very popular. And then, I'm sorry, what was my other question? Oh, yeah, the other ones are kind of off topic, so I'll wait to ask them privately.
So just
That's my
whether
one
gravel
question.
yards are
Right,
considered
yeah.
impervious, Counselor?
They are not.
Okay.
Gravel is included in the definition of impervious area for property areas that are travelways. So if it's a gravel driveway or a parking lot, because the incidence of compaction basically turns the surface into an impervious area. So they are included if it's a travelway. They are not for decorative purposes and landscaping.
Thank you.
Thanks, that's good to know. I think since so many people have rocks.
All right. Counselors, other questions? Counselor Shumway, please.
I have a neighbor that has a huge landscaping with rocks, and let me say this. The first thing they put down is they put down a ground barrier, and then they put the rocks on top. So it's absolutely not going to absorb very much moisture. It's going to run right off the property because of the ground barrier. So that's not helping, absorb any amount of moisture.
Counselor Newman?
How do you think residents will feel about paying for this rain water runoff on like sidewalks that we force them or require them to put in?
I'm not familiar with the code, perhaps.
I believe the question is, and I think I know the answer to this because we touched on it at the beginning, but public sidewalks would be exempted, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the sort of sidewalk in front of the house is exempted. So,
Correct.
good question, though. Okay. Other questions? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to the public, but thank you both, Aaron and Elizabeth.
Well,
We
thank
appreciate
you. Your involvement is just critical to us, so thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. All right, any member of the public wishing to speak to this work session can go ahead and raise your hand on the Zoom call or come forward if you are in the room. Seeing no public comment, I will close. Oh, please, Mrs. Stratton. I should be more considerate of the
Looking at
distance
this,
you have to cover.
Christopher Stratton.
Thank you.
1569 North 6th Street. In the aspects of like West Laramie, whenever we come down to paying for trash, paying for electric, paying all of those items, we pay for a service that we have. There is a whole bunch of West Laramie that is impermeable surfaces without drainage. So would you be charging those that have their houses in that area for a service that they're not receiving? That's my biggest question. And thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Mr. Schuster, thank you for being here.
Brian Schuster, been on city council and talked about many of this. There is some state laws about trying to save rainwater. It sounds really ridiculous, but some of the state laws say that when it comes out of the sky, it is now our water rights. So I hear people talking about saving water and for the dogs and ponds on their property. How legal is that? Because you're in a gray area.
Thank you, Councilor Schuster. Councilor Newman, we'll buy you some of that camouflage netting to put over here.
I don't save any. It's not there.
All right. Any other members of the public wishing to speak during this public comment period? Great. All right, I'll close public comment. Back to council, I suppose. Councilor Newman?
Just so you know, there's no, harvesting is legal in Wyoming as long as you don't take it off your property. So
Thank you.
I don't need the canopy.
That ruined my Christmas gift for you. All right. All right, Councilor Doherty.
The other question I had that I forgot earlier was, it sounds like some of the equipment and staff could be shared between stormwater and wastewater. Is that right? Like, you wouldn't need a different set of cameras, or would you, once they've been in poop water? You can't put stormwater. Can some of that equipment be shared when we have the scoping kinds of things? And so that was my question. Can it be shared between those two services?
Thank you, Councilor. Director Webb.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, we do some sharing now all the time. Divisions work with each other all the time. Departments do. As far as specific equipment, like you mentioned, the camera, a lot of times the cameras are a little bit different sizes. The storm sewers are a lot bigger than our sanitary sewers, so we require larger cameras. And then also with our camera programs right now, they're busy all the time with the cameras. So depending on the equipment and staff and what's going on, there are times that we work across divisions and even departments.
Thank you, Director Webb. All right, anything else, council members? All right. Before we close the work session, I would just say I think it's important that we show the public how we are using this money immediately. And I think the street sweeping program is one of those. I mean, I think people will love seeing more street sweeping in their neighborhoods, but you know, maybe a more predictable schedule to those sort of things. But I do think us demonstrating and not waiting for the year 2 or 3 of people paying these fees to be able to demonstrate more quickly, I do think would be meaningful. All right, we will close this work session. Council, do you guys want to break, or do you feel okay hopping into the next? Any guess on the second one? The length? But any guess on the length of it, Janine?
15 minutes.
Okay.
30 to 40, depending on questions.
Okay, let's do it. All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and open the work session on the fiscal year 23 workforce report. City Manager.
Good evening, Council. So I believe that you have the handout, or you're going to get the handout, which is the workforce report itself. Just by way of background, the city does prepare an annual report on our workforce for the public. HR works with me on that. I have our Human Resources Director here, Patty Russell, and she is going to take the second half of this presentation, and I'm going to present the first half. So I think we're ready to go. Whoop. Okay. A little happy on the button here tonight. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to start off by talking to you about what our authorized position allowance is, looking at a 10-year history. I provide this visual because I don't think the sheer numbers are the focus here, but if you are interested in the sheer numbers, they're in your handout and they're at the bottom of this slide. In general, we have in the city 279.8, I think, full-time equivalent positions. And you can see here those broken down by categories of our enterprise funds or business activities, which is water, wastewater, and solid waste. You can also see our general government positions, and then fire and police shown there. You can see the trend line is pretty consistent, really the only deviation in general government, and you can see that history going back for 10 years. 279.8, thank you. I don't know why I couldn't pull that number off this slide. That is our current count of FTEs here at the city, and those are authorized permanent positions. As a reminder for you, Council, and for the public, the City Council do designate authorized permanent FTEs. We do flex part-time staff, and also occasionally we'll have temporary authorized positions that we'll talk to you about, but we use that management and supervision discretion to make sure that, for instance, if we know we're going to be losing staff in the fire department, for example, we know we have 2 retirements at the end of the year, we will temporarily overhire, as we call it, above the allocation of 48 in that department by maybe 2 positions. So we may run for a short period of time at 50 positions, but knowing that we have planned attrition in that year, that will bring that within the fiscal year into line with your authorized allocation of FTEs. If you have any questions, just jump in anytime. Okay, next slide. So as we look at our authorized positions by functional area of responsibility, and here we're just looking at fiscal 17, 23, and 24, but I wanted to just kind of zoom in on a more recent time period and not be looking clear back at fiscal 14. You can see that we are, again, very consistent. There has been a little bit of change from 17 to 23, 24, the most current 2 years, and that is because we did go through a reduction in force in 2017 and 18, and some of you that were here at the time will recall we let go a good handful of positions in that year, including a couple senior management positions and some top leadership positions in the organization. This slide is going to look at authorized positions by the type of service that is being provided. And again, we're looking here at enterprise separately from general government positions, and then also from public safety positions. So in this chart, you can see our public safety positions. You see that dip in 17 and 18. In those years, we let go of 3, I believe, if I remember correctly, grant-funded police positions, or excuse me, 3 grant-funded fire positions and 2 grant-funded police positions, because we literally couldn't make the match, frankly. So that is the deviation there in the green bars, which reflect our public safety functions. If you want to take a little bit deeper dive into public safety and look at it broken down by type, you'll see our police and fire positions have been largely consistent over the last 10 years, other than we did have that sort of glory period of 15, 16 fiscal years where they had some extra help with those grant-funded positions, but ultimately we have ended up returning to the historical norm in that department since then and stay there to this day. So this is the section where we would typically go into residents served and look at our customer service ratio, but we have to do a little bit of geeky stuff about the census first. So this is U.S. Census data plotted out for fiscal years 14 through fiscal year 20. 21, 2, 3, and 4 came from the Wyoming Division of Economic Analysis. And I'm going to talk to you about why we did that. But I think what you see here is this like Teton scale drop in population, in theory, in Laramie in 2020. So what is going on here, right? Does anyone think we've lost population in Laramie? Do we feel like we're shrinking to anybody here? I'm just asking out of curiosity because I was working on this week and thinking that myself. So let's talk a little bit about what is going on there. So the census and college towns have kind of a fraught history. College towns are difficult to count notoriously. The census refers to post-secondary student populations as, quote, hard to count populations. The pandemic in 2020 exacerbated a historical problem for college towns. Not only in 2020 do we believe that we were undercounted as a college town, we believe we were undercounted in 2010, although we were better counted in 2010 than we had been the previous census in 2000. So this is a pervasive national issue. The International Town and Gown Association, the National League of Cities, and the International City County Management Association were concerned enough about it in the wake of the 2020 count that they jointly authored a request to Congress for congressional relief or adjustment for college towns, because these numbers locked in 2000 will affect the funding this city receives and every other college town receives receives for 10 full years. The reason for it's obvious, but I'll just state it in case the public are wondering. If you recall, just look at our own experience here in Laramie. In the second week of March, the University of Wyoming released students on spring break and said, we'll let you know when classes will start back up. But of course, this is when the pandemic nationally became very recognized. And within 4 days, they told those students, don't come back, just stay home. And then the census takers rolled out 2 weeks later, and the paperwork. So this is part of the problem. Not only are the students historically difficult to count, and they are, according to census rules, to be counted in the community that they reside in on the 1st of April, but the pandemic conditions in 2020 just decimated counting those populations in college communities everywhere. So I wanted to run you through this. So the question, what if we project our 24 population using Laramie's historical annual growth rate? And that has been pretty steady for 20 years. I think it's like 1.125% per year, but I just used 1%. And so I took fiscal 19, the last, what we think is semi-reliable census number, despite our difficult to count student population. And I just inflated it 1% per year. And if you ran that number, we would be sitting right now at 3,465 people. Compare that to what we are told by the official statistics we are sitting at right now, which is 32,395 people. That's a difference of 7%. Our local data does not support any decline in Laramie's population. We don't see that in our housing usage. We don't see that in our utility connections. There's just nothing that we can touch on that would assert that that count in 31,477 people, according to the official census count, we have no data to support that that could be accurate. So I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but with no local data and knowing that our historical growth rate and our housing is being used up more quickly than we have supply for, I would estimate Laramie's been undercounted by 5 to 10% at least, right? But it's anybody's guess here, I guess, and there are probably statisticians who might disagree with me.
Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, maybe I'm not reading this correctly, but it looks like that 7% difference is FY25 compared to FY24.
Yeah, thank you. Let me clarify something on that. So the green chart there, it does go through 25.
Okay.
That last data point there, but it doesn't project for that. So you're correct. I'm looking at fiscal year. Of course, that just changed July 1st. So it's really the difference of a couple of months, but good catch.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Oh, Councilor Gabriel, please. Thanks.
Thank you. And Janine, I remember when Todd was in charge of our census.
Correct.
And he filed some kind of,
Yes,
what would you call it?
Yes, we did work with the University of Wyoming.
Complaint or
And they
adjustment, and nothing happened?
Yeah, nothing happened. And what we know, in order for a community to make a valid challenge of a census is probably 100,000, well, I shouldn't say that. I've heard from other communities that were college towns that they could spend that much actually challenging the census. One of the things that Todd did do, the assistant city manager in 2020, is we did work with the University of Wyoming, and they were able to submit directly to the census their group quarters living numbers so that we could at least get an accurate count of on-campus students. But then, of course, you all know that the majority of students don't live on campus, and that's where we think that the count was pretty flawed.
And because of all the COVID situation, they just didn't even consider it.
Well, the census did take into account the institutionalized persons, that's their phrase for it, that live on campus in dormitory housing. But what they couldn't accurately count were all the students living in off-campus housing. Nor could the university give us a reliable number on that.
Thanks, Councilor. Other questions while we're holding for a minute? Okay.
Okay, so the reason we had to geek out on the census a little bit is because as we look at our customer service ratio, of course, it all relies on the census numbers being right, or at least somewhere in the realm of reality. And so when we look at our 10-year customer service ratio, this is the number of residents that are served by every city employee or city full-time equivalent position. And here's the history as it shakes out. In fiscal 14, one city employee was serving 113.6 customers or residents. In fiscal 24, it's 115.8 residents being served by each employee. And you can see again, I put the asterisk next to fiscal 20 because it's pretty hard to know if the fiscal 20, 21, 22, 23, and 4 numbers are very valid. If we believe that our population was undercounted, then that customer service ratio in fiscal 24 could be pushing 120 some people being served per city resident. But for what it's worth, there is the information for everybody to arrive at their own conclusions about. I think what I would offer overall is I track this as a city manager because I feel like it's a way for us to understand if we are growing our staffing in a way that is needed, basically. What is the demand for our services? We are a service-driven organization. We spend a lot of time in here focusing on building things, on capital construction and water projects and sewer projects, but truly the majority of the services that we provide are human services. It's planning services. It's people coming in to pay utility bills. It's municipal court services. And those services have to be provided one person to another. And so this helps us to understand if our staffing is in line with population growth and if we're putting too much demand on each employee and exceeding maybe their capacity to do work in a 2,080-hour work year. Okay, I'm almost wrapping up my section. We'll hand this over to Patty for the demographics section. So, something that we did add this year, we've looked at this in years past, but really did kind of a deep dive this year, based largely on some of the public concern that I have read, and I'm sure all of you have read. So we looked at Laramie's workforce compared to other first-class cities in Wyoming. Before we get into the actual numbers, I would need to draw some definitions here. I think for lay people, when they will compare one city to another, it is very easy to basically make mistakes, to cast one brush for all cities, when in fact cities are all very different. So what makes Laramie unique among the 4 cities you see reflected here is we're considered a full-service city. And I remember when I first started working here, and I would see that all over in the city's literature, Laramie's a full-service city, and I'm like, well, isn't every city a full-service city? Well, no, not every city is a full-service city, and so I learned over time why we focus on that here. Laramie operates, Casper operates most similar to Laramie of the communities you see here. To give you a contrast, Gillette is very different than Laramie, even though we are very similar, nearly the same in population. Gillette recreation services and centers are operated by county government. The landfill is operated by county government. Fire suppression is not operated by the city of Gillette. It's a countywide consortium. And EMS services are not provided by city government. Cheyenne is different from Laramie because, and this is a mistake that people commonly make, they'll look and they'll say, well, Cheyenne has so many fewer employees than Laramie. Well, it's misleading. When you look at Cheyenne, you have to look at the Board of Public Utilities, which is technically a separate governing body, and BOPU, Board of Public Utilities, provides all the water and sewer services for Cheyenne. So for purposes of comparison, we have rolled Cheyenne and BOPU together so that they together are more like Laramie. The other thing I'll point out here is, as I said, Casper's most similar to us. The only service they don't provide that we provide is countywide EMS. Cheyenne BOPU does not provide countywide EMS. The county has a consolidated dispatch center in Laramie County. It's called El Quad C. And then in Gillette, as I said, of the 6 services that Laramie provides, Gillette provides 2 of those directly, and that is sewer and water utility, and then Gillette does operate their countywide E911 communication center.
So,
Councilor Pierce, please.
Is BOPU, are they public employees?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. And frankly, when we look at wages for this region, we know one of our main competitors is BOPU. And so we're always cognizant and aware of what they pay, and they are always cognizant and aware of what we pay. Yes, yes. Okay, so building off of that data, as we look at our workforce compared to our other first-class cities, but recognizing that first-class cities don't provide all the same services, this is kind of what we found, and I have to thank Patty for pulling this information. She reached out to our friends in Casper, Cheyenne, Beauport, and Gillette, and got from them their authorized FTE count for fiscal '24, their personnel budget, their census estimates, and then the number of residents served by one city employee was a calculation that we applied to the numbers that they provided to us. And then we also broke out per capita personnel expense. And so when you look at the customer service ratio here, I think you'll see Laramie is, our staff carry a heavy load. I thought it was interesting when I looked at Gillette with 135 residents being served by Gillette city employees, but then I think, well, if we go back a slide, they also don't provide 4 of the services we provide. So, you know, it's interesting, I guess, and you can draw your own conclusions about that. And then for Laramie, our per capita personnel burden is $102,868 per year, which is on the lower end, not as low as Gillette, but again, Gillette is providing 4 less services. So some interesting comparisons there. Do you have any questions for me? Otherwise, I'm going to let HR Director Russell walk you through the demographic picture of our workforce.
Any questions, council members? Thank you, City Manager. This was appreciated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. Sometimes you can't read the screen, so you got to look along here. There you go.
Perfect. Hold on to it. Yeah, go ahead if it's on the City Manager's part.
I just want to thank you, City Manager. It really helps put some things into perspective.
Thank you. Director Russell.
Morning, Mayor, City Council, or good afternoon or evening, I should say. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our actual workforce. We've got 279.8 employees currently employed as of 6/30/24, the end of the fiscal year. There was 277.4 or 5, something like that. So about 278 employees. So a lot of my numbers are based on the 278, not on the authorized positions, because that's actual positions. Of those employees, of those 278 employees, 200 of them, 208 were males and 70 were females. As is typical of most municipalities, public safety and public works are predominantly male-driven, so that's why the disparity in numbers there. The average age of our workforce is about 42 years old. But we have employees from Generation Z all the way to baby boomers. Yes, those baby boomers are still hanging on. Our millennial employees make up the majority at 115 employees, followed by Gen X at 90, Gen Z at 48, and those baby boomers are at 25 employees strong. Thank goodness. So 89.93% of our employees are white, and the City of Laramie residents are at 85.54, to put that in perspective. So we're pretty close to what the city population is as well. With other employees falling into Alaskan and American Indian, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Black, or those that self-identified as 2 races or more. While our ethnic diversity reflects our community, we can improve in this area, and we've got some ideas on how to do that. It's HR suggestions that we focus on diversity recruiting in the next year. This is a practice of hiring candidates using the process that is free from any biases. It still gives merit-based recruitment based on hiring the best candidate available, but it is structured to give all applicants, regardless of background, the opportunities that are out there. Of our female employees, our 70 female employees, 70% of them are at the director level. I guess I need to move my screen here. 7% are at the director level, 3% are managers, and 16% are supervisors. Of the 208 males, 3% are directors, 3% are managers, and 7% are supervisors. That just kind of gives you the layout of the supervisory and manager level of our workforce. The difference in pay between males and females is in the city of Laramie is about $1,202, while the national difference between males and females is $10,712. The city of Laramie strives to pay equally and promote fairly and not have a gender gap within the city. It's almost non-existent. So some other ideas that we have for creating a more diverse workforce and a good population of employees is reevaluate how we source talent and to ensure we are advertising to diverse candidates, offer internships to diverse candidates to create a pipeline of interest in the city, consider using blind resumes, which we do to a degree, and assessments early in the process, basically meaning that we delineate any information that would market them as male or female, or any kind of data that would show any kind of difference in their demographics to the hiring manager, so they can only do it based on job experiences and education. Require hiring supervisors to participate in unconscious bias training and to identify their impartiality. Need the next screen. So turnover, we had in fiscal year 24, total of 38 employees leave the city. 36 of those were either retirements or voluntary resignations. 34% of the total terminations were in the police department, while Public Works was at 24% and the Parks and Rec department totaled 18%. Our annual turnover rate was 13.67%. with the national average being 42%, and the average of governmental entities is at 16.49%. So we're doing pretty well there. Retention is extremely important to the city. I can get to the next screen. Your computer's just slightly different than mine. So the average years of service for an employee with the city is 8.5 years, while the average for governmental entities is 6.6 years. Our fire department has the highest tenure with 10.31 years of service, followed closely by the police department at 10 years of service. Public Works is at 8.69 years. I was hoping that Brooks was going to stay for that. Administrative Services was at 6.53, and the Parks and Rec was at 7.75. We have 28 employees who are currently eligible for retirement. From the city of Laramie, with another 39 who are eligible within the next 5 years. Of the 28 currently eligible to retire, 39% are law enforcement, including police, the dispatch center, and the animal shelter. And 25% are in Public Works, and fire is at 21%. Having said that, police and fire, the police department itself is at 100% filled. We have 2 dispatch positions available right now, but they're getting filled as well. And fire is currently fully staffed as well. So we're getting some good people in, we're getting them trained, and we're getting them so they can be fully in service and working at a high level soon. We are continually looking at succession planning and training for all of those that intend to retire.
Councilor Richardson, did you want to add a question in here?
Actually, no, my bar lowered on my screen so I could see what the bottom thing was. It answered my own question. Sorry about that.
No problem.
No problem. So highlights from this report. If I can get there. While the number of full-time authorized positions in our organization has not kept up with the population growth, as the city manager has stated, recruiting has been much more successful in fiscal year 24 than it has been in several years past. Our ethnic diversity reflects our community, with much more of our workforce being millennials, and our gender pay gap remains almost non-existent. Currently, the number of individuals approaching retirement age and failure to train employees adequately will result in significant loss of valuable organizational and departmental knowledge. So that is something that we will be continually focusing on. Do you have any questions?
Council members, any questions? Okay.
I do.
Councilor Richardson, go ahead. We'll start.
Sorry, this one isn't on your screen. That pay gap, are you looking at same jobs, or is this just men versus women across the board?
Just men versus women across the board.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions before we go to comments? Councilor Gabriel, you have a question?
Janine, or maybe Patty, we were having trouble with lifeguards at the swimming pool, and I was just wondering, because sitting on the rec board, we've had a number of board members concerned about hours at the swimming pool. Have we rectified that problem?
Talk about if there's open.
From what I understand from speaking to an assistant county manager or city manager and the parks or the recreation manager, the lifeguards are staying and we're able to get more in because of the little bit higher pay that we're giving them. So it seems like we are doing much, much better in that respect.
Great, thank you.
All right, Councilor Newman, you have a comment. So Councilor O'Doherty and then Councilor Pierce. If you've got questions, we're still in questions.
I just wanted to,
Councilor O'Doherty and then to you, Councilor Pierce.
When YDOT was here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about engineering and how the university is not really churning out the civil engineers or PEs. So I wonder can we do, or do we do this already, like internships to encourage more civil engineers at the university to come work for Laramie? And also maybe there's something we can do to encourage the university to start providing more civil engineering classes, because right now I think it's mostly petroleum engineering.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Pierce.
yeah, this was just a comment related to Councilor Gabriel's question. I think hours were addressed too for the lifeguards, so I think that also helped fix the problem and actually increase the number of people with a slight reduction in the hours that they were working. Did I hear that right?
I think that's correct. I think also having college start back up and the college students coming back has helped with some of that. High school students were able to do it during the summer.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, Councilor Newman and other councilors with comments, get ready.
Two comments. Thank you for all the work that you guys did to put this together, and the practical hiring of making sure that it's ethical is fantastic, especially that's my degree. So, and my second comment was the bias training. It's actually pretty good training, and maybe council should look at doing that as well. So.
Thank you, Councilor Newman. A great idea. All right, other comments? Thank you. All right, Councilor Doherty and then Councilor Richardson.
So mine's a comment. I just want to thank our Patty and her staff that the ability to retain people, to have such a professional workforce in this city. I mean, we have some of the most amazing professionals, and the fact that we've been able to retain them speaks to paying attention that we are competing with the Front Range, and I think paying people well, and also the same people are bringing in a lot of grant money, so they pay for themselves many times over. So I'm really grateful for your paying attention in such detail and keeping us competitive. And also, I'm so glad you pointed out that we're a full-service city, because that was going to be my question before this started, like, what are all the services compared to other cities? And so it's good to know, so people can put it in perspective, so it's not apples to oranges. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Councilmember Richardson.
I would echo Councilor O'Doherty's thoughts, and I also have a request, Patty, if it's possible to get the breakdown of that wage gap job to job to see if we have any gaps within same positions. Is that doable?
Yeah, Councilor Richardson, if I could, I'll jump in while Patty's making a note here. Because I thought about mentioning this, and I appreciate your interest in it because it's always been a strong interest of mine as well. So when we, for instance, make wage adjustments in any pay band here, HR routinely looks at that pay band and everybody in the pay band to make sure that they are being paid appropriately compared to their peers in that pay band based on their knowledge, skills, ability, and time in service. So I'm sure Patty can answer whether she could get you that data or whatnot, but what I want to assure you is it's a routine practice in this organization to make sure that we look at that and try to make sure that we are not underpaying certain individuals or overpaying others. And that's a practice we've evolved over probably the last 8 to 10 years.
I appreciate that. Thank you for addressing it and looking at it.
In addition to that, we also, when we're looking at jobs and where they should be paid, we do compare them to other communities in the area that have the same types of jobs. So we can make sure that if we're in direct competition with Cheyenne or with the Front Range, Northern Colorado, then we're not going to lose people to them. So we're always doing comparisons of salaries.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Councilors, other comments? Okay, thank you, Director Russell. Thank you, City Manager. All right, we're going to turn this over to the public. If there's any members of the public wishing to speak to this work session, now is your opportunity to do so. Just raise your hand on the Zoom call or come forward if you're in the room. All right, we'll close the public comment period and go ahead and close that work session. Council members, we're going to move right on to updates and comments. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with you, Councilor Gabriel, if you have any updates or comments.
Attended the Rotary Park groundbreaking ceremony last week along with the Vice Mayor, Councilor Richardson, and the Mayor was there with Rudy. That was really nice to see. And of course, that park is southeast of the high school on Bill Nye, and looking forward to that. Albany County Tourism Board has hired a new director. She is Andy Jesperson from Cheyenne, and she worked for Visit Cheyenne and other organizations. She will start next week, and Andy is taking over for Scott Larson, who took a job in Oregon. So they've moved rather quickly. They had close to 200 applications, but some of them maybe not quite up to speed. But anyway, they had to sort through a lot of applications for the tourism board. And they got a director that they're really pleased with. So Andy will take over next week. And I also wanted to commend the city manager for the staff update and her comments in honor and memoriam of the dedicated colleague, Mike Lytle. That was so well done. I read through that, and I was really moved by all the outstanding things that Mike did over his long career with the city. And kudos to you, Janine, for putting that all together.
Thank you. I just have to say, of course, it was a group effort, but there is nobody on the staff of this city who didn't learn pretty much everything they know about our water system from Mr. Lytle. I mean, it's just heart-wrenching to have lost him, but he has a huge, powerful legacy here.
Thank you, Janine, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Richardson?
Oh, can't see if my... Oh. Didn't know if I was on mute still. Just attended a meeting, kind of citywide meeting on housing that was hosted by the hospital the other day. Some good discussion, and that is it for my update.
Thank you. Counselor Newman?
No updates at this time.
Vice Mayor?
It's been a busy week, but I'll be brief. I also attended the citywide housing meeting, and this was our second. And Trey Sherwood is helping to coordinate that, and we are getting rather a broad base of individuals where it's not only those working with vulnerable populations, but it's people in business, real estate, developers, business organizations. So I think we're starting to build a coalition, and I think that's very exciting. The Wyoming Business Council presented to us, Josh Jarrell, and the group that was probably about 30 people decided that it was worthwhile and that we are going to meet again, and I believe that date is September 23rd. And those are open meetings, and they're trying to advertise and reach out to others to attend. So we're trying to get as broad a base to look at housing and to explore some ideas about what we might do. Town and Gown, then, after that Monday, met on Thursday, the Economic Development Subcommittee, and our topic was also workforce development and housing. And that was well attended, and things are starting to happen, and it's very exciting. I feel like many of us have been working on that and brought things from infancy to toddlerhood. So it's starting to take off, and we're trying to keep up. On Thursday, 22nd, Laramie Beautification Committee met, and we funded, I think you'll be interested in this, it's going to be a mural crosswalks, and there'll be one at the entrance of the Ice Center. There'll be one at the north entrance of the rec center and one at the east entrance of the rec center. And they're very interesting designs. And we were working with Laramie Public Art in doing that. And the thought was that it would really help to bring attention that those are crosswalks as people are going into the parking lot. So I think that's going to be exciting. Micah and I met with Planning Division just to kind of debrief some of the housing meetings that we've been to and to get it into perspective to make sure we're clear on our talking points and things like that. And that was very helpful, and I appreciate the Planning Department and Derek for putting that together. Planning Commission met on last night, and they will be attending the farmers market on the month of September, and the Planning Commission plan to go down there on the 27th and to spend time. I think that's enough. And then I would like to just make one announcement, and that is that Hospice of Laramie is having their annual fundraiser 2024 Living in Color, which is a 5K color run, and it is a huge amount of fun. It begins on this Saturday at 8:30 a.m. at Hospice of Laramie, 1754 Centennial Drive. T-shirts, food, prizes, and O'Dwyer's is donating a Bloody Mary bar. So come join us. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we hope to see you. So that's mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. The Pilot Hill Board met, and just a quick update, the trailhead is now slated for construction early next year, so don't expect it to pop up in the next few weeks before snow. Councilor Pierce.
You know, I don't have an update this week.
Counselor Shumway.
Thank you, Your Honor. WAM has a new executive director, and we will have the Region 1 meeting in September here in Laramie. All of you I think it'd be important for us to attend that, to get to meet our new executive director. She is fantastic, and I want to thank our city manager for helping in that process of getting that person here. That's all I have.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor O'Doherty?
Disability Council meets next week at the same time as that meeting with the WAM director, so I'll just try to come late. And I don't have any other updates, just trying to get better after all that travel. I got sick.
Yeah, feel better, Counselor O'Doherty. And Counselor Somerville's off the call. All right. Agenda review, folks. You've got a pretty brief agenda, or not much that will surprise you. If you guys want to take a look at that. Great. Great. All right. Thank you, council members. They're only at the beginning on the work sessions. Yes, sorry. All right. Going to go ahead and close the work session. Or I guess we've done that. We're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.